Old man doing a podcast. Real weirdos. We have English degrees. Real weirdos. We talk about movies for way too goddamn long. Oh, Alex, did you finish watching the beautiful Stargate film that you teased us with last week?
I actually did.
Oh,
Did
God.
you?
Did. I was planning on bringing that up.
Was it as glorious as the first half?
Oh, God, this movie. No, it wasn't as glorious, I guess. I mean, it depends on how you want to define the word glorious, but
I mean, I was just saying words.
It melted.
I was just trying to get you to talk about it.
it just melted into just the craziest sci-fi movie I had ever seen. Like,
Really?
Wow, really?
not like craziest sci-fi movie I'd ever seen, excuse me, but it just was so
Unnecessary hyperbolism.
low budget. It was so... That's a good way to describe it, actually, Jeff.
Hyperbolism?
Yeah. It's just like everything was so over the top, except for like Kurt Russell's acting and his character. I think it's the way that the director wanted him to act, but he's so stiff and like he's like the John Wayne of space, I guess. And then you have
amazing.
James Spader. I did that last time.
It's unfortunate. I think like Russell Crowe should basically be fucking Snake Plissken in anything, you know?
Russell Crowe?
Like
Did I say
type
that?
Yeah.
Kurt Russell?
Oh, Kurt Russell. Yeah.
I was so confused.
I'd watch Russell Crowe as Snake Plissken. That'd be funny.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Gotta
basically
save New
it's
York.
basically him. It's basically that character, just in like he's part of the establishment. He's like the military guy that's like, hey, everything's going to be done by the book and it's going to be done under my eye.
Oh, so he's sci-fi captain, like number one.
Yeah. And James Spader's like the like nerdy scientist who's like, oh, what does the government want with Egyptian tablets, a 10,000-year-old dialect? And like James Spader's character at the end ends up falling in love with some like human
With Russell Crowe.
alien that he meets and
Snake
stays
Plissken.
behind the Stargate. And it's just all just so bad.
It's funny because we're shitting on it, but like if my wife was on this podcast, she would be like me on the Dune episode. She'd be like,
Really?
but what about this scene?
She's
What
a
about
big
this
Stargate
character?"
fan?
She's a huge Stargate fan.
Of the movie?
Huge. Of all of it. Anything
All of
that's
it.
Stargate related, she's a huge fan. She likes
I
all
bet
Maybe
the
you
the
gotta
show's
show
a
her
lot
some
better.
more Roland Emmerich movies.
She can be our first guest and explain to us why she thinks they're so good.
I don't know how interesting that conversation would be. I love
Oh, boy.
Jolene. She's great, but I don't know about that.
But yeah, no,
movie-wise.
the movie is terrible. But I guess it's become somewhat of like a, mini cult kind of classic because it's like the first iteration of this story or on film or media or whatever. So,
Well,
the
Roland
show
Emmerich
spawned
movies
after that.
do well, like in terms of the box office generally. I'm not sure about in the last 10 years or so, but Independence Day was a gigantic hit, and he's had other hits besides that as well.
yeah.
Because it's easily digestible, broad entertainment that idiots can enjoy.
Yeah.
God.
It's
Here
pretty
we go.
ridiculous.
Now we need to have like a sound effects board so I can like ring the pretentious bell.
Yeah. Oh, I knew it as I was saying it.
I know.
And I'm not going to say that about most things, but like Roland Emmerich, Adam Sandler, yeah, for sure.
I mean, I don't
No
disagree.
doubt.
I definitely don't disagree.
No,
with
I
you.
know you don't. That's why you're
Yeah.
on the podcast.
Oh God. Well, that was our review for Stargate.
Yeah, speaking of doing a podcast, today we're talking about The Thin Red Line from 1998 by director Terrence Malick. It's a war movie. I had seen this a number of times before. I think Alex might have seen it a long time ago, and Jeff had not seen it. But I picked it because I really like Terrence Malick as a director. I think he's really interesting, and we'll get into why that is. And he hadn't made a movie for like 20 years before this and came back with this incredibly gorgeous, in my opinion, war film, which is an interesting way to come back. But let's get some thoughts generally from you guys first. Alex, what did you think of The Thin Red Line?
So I'd never seen it, actually.
Oh, you'd never seen it? Okay.
No, but it got caught up in like that craze of the late 90s like war films that were coming out. I think Saving Private Ryan came out the same year.
Same year.
I believe so, yeah.
Yep.
So there was that. There was like Enemy of the Gate at the Gate with Jude Law and Ed Harris. There was like a lot of these war movies that were very similar coming out at that time. And I saw most of them, but I didn't see this one. And I avoided this one for a long time because I didn't like kind of the cookie cutter mold that I saw from some of the movies that maybe followed Saving Private Ryan's lead. Like war movies that are vying for Oscars, right? So we talked about Dunkirk a few months back when we did our Nolan overview. And
Did we do a Nolan overview? You mean just like we referenced it in the Tenet episode?
oh, you're right. You're right. We did just
we
reference
did
it in the
we
Tenet
did
episode.
David Fincher.
That is who we did. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a few months ago, people.
It's okay. It's true.
Anyways, I feel like that this movie is like a way ahead of its time as far as showing war in film, especially for the late 90s, especially for what audiences were like seeing and what critics were raving about and what movies were popular, at least at the time. This movie, seeing it now, I'm like, this movie could have come out now in 2021 and still been a viable like depiction that audiences, I think, today would like even more. So I really liked this movie, and I thought it was extremely pretty. And I also think it was just slow enough for me to really appreciate the beauty of the movie. It's not too much of a war-y movie.
I don't know. It gets pretty worry, but we'll talk through these points. But Jeff, how did you feel about The Thin Red Line before we get to the nitty-gritties?
Yeah, wow. This movie, I literally have just finished it before we started recording. I got kind of delayed this week, and it's a hard movie to kind of just come right off of and start talking about. It requires a lot of digestion. I'm going to say, honestly, it's hard to say I like this movie in the sense where it's hard to say I like anything that's extremely horrifying to watch. This movie's turned my stomach from the beginning to the end. The end does let up a little bit as they're kind of like leaving, and they kind of
it's bookended. Yeah,
it kind of shows the journey home. So there's a bit of journey home section where it's calmer, but for most of the movie, we go from and I very much don't want to use the word gratuitous because I don't think it is gratuitous, but the scenes in which this movie just like depicts war in its vulgarity are stomach churning. This is the most anti-war movie I have ever seen. This, when I watch this, I realize now like how these movies that you referenced, Alex, I mean, I stress to say, are almost propaganda, like
100%.
pro-American propaganda.
100%.
This is the actual war movie to me. This is now the quintessential war movie in my category, because these scenes, and we'll get into more detail about them, but I mean, I just, my stomach and my like grimacing and wincing, and I mean, I consider myself I've seen some pretty horrifying real life shit and shit in movies, and these scenes were just, I mean, this movie made me cry, like legitimately made me cry. It was not through like a scene in particular, but I think it was just through like overexposure, and that's why
empathy. You feel empathy for all of these people and the level of fear that they have, and I think that that's a big point. We're going to go into spoilers now, but I think if anybody wants to see like a really beautiful contemplation on how terrible war is in all of its capacities, this movie doesn't pull punches, and it's very poetic. I'd say see it. It doesn't have the kind of narrative arc that something like Saving Private Ryan or most war movies have. In fact, the story is very in the background. It's almost like a tone poem.
Yeah, it's
in my estimation.
Oh, it's extremely abstract, and it's almost impossible to find any type of linear narrative in the first like 40 minutes. I was not confused, but I was just very, very shocked and surprised because of when this movie came out and like where it was sandwiched in what was popular at the time. I just thought growing up and never seeing this film, I thought it was always going to be like that. I'm like, oh, it's going to be just some simple run-of-the-mill narrative about some good old boys who fucking go and fight and then blah, 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 blah. There's going to be music and orchestras and whatever. You know? I'm not saying those movies are bad, but this movie, I really do feel like this recommendation was really good for me. Because you guys have gotten to know the movies that I like and things like that, but I think that it's
funny games, falling down.
Yeah.
Just movies about psychopaths, basically.
Yeah. I mean, it would have been crazy to see him in this environment.
I would say.
Oh, you
like
just dropped
movies.
Michael Douglas in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I would
Nick
say you
Nolte.
more like movies about like altered psychological states.
Yeah.
That's true. I think Nick Nolte's character is like almost a commentary on those other movies because he's that like
He's fucking
that
insane.
kind of soldier archetype who's like the only time you worry about a soldier is if he stops bitching. And it's
Yeah.
like these things that like douchey military people would say. You know what I mean? And it's just
Absolutely.
but it also explores his psyche before this, and you see that he's kind of just like a broken, wounded man.
Yeah.
And that element of like, you got your war, I've waited 15 years for my war. Like it's this need to prove himself to the point where it's like it feels like he's like a little boy. You see him as like a little boy on a playground who like never learned to grow up or like learned what love is. And he's like the fucking commander of all of this nonsense.
Oh, yeah. Like, the small sliver of John Travolta's appearance is perfect in setting all of that up, right? Like, this younger upstart takes over the position that Nick Nolte really wanted, and he just has to bite his lip and deal with it because he's such a company man. It's infuriating at the beginning, and I was almost rooting for his character. I thought he was going to be some like salty old dog that was going to like help these young guys take the ridge, but instead, I mean, I guess he does help them, but in just a very different way.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, like when I started watching this, was equally confused. I was like, oh, there's not a quite set narrative. It almost had a Saving Private Ryan beginning type thing. So I started kind of making allusions and even jokes in my notes. I was like, oh, this is like if Keats wrote Saving Private Ryan. You know, I started making like, because it's so broody and like nature specific in the beginning. And then all of that just fell away as soon as like they landed on the island and like the fear. I mean, everyone in this movie acts to their highest caliber, in my opinion. Like the fear, the panic, everything is just so painted on their faces. The detail, everything's rusty and gritty and covered in dirt. It's just, they just really paid attention to all of the psychological effects of the movie.
I've never seen fear in a movie like I've seen this. Maybe, but I really can't remember. And especially how young people are. Like you have the kid in there who dies. I mean, the death and destruction, and just looking at people's faces, it's very much like a facial actors movie.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just something that I felt the last time I watched Schindler's List as well. Like one of the great powers of that film is looking at people's faces and like seeing the experience of that surrounding, that context, just etched into it like if it were etched into marble or something. It's really intense. Yeah, I mean, the movie's about fear in my estimation, but you brought up an interesting point there with the movie's very meditative at the beginning and the end especially.
Yeah.
It does so as well toward the middle, but it's very much like it's poetic, right? It's these guys looking at nature and living in this little village and thinking about what the concept of mortality means. And then when the war actually happens, all that falls away and it is just brutal and insane. and you don't even know where they are or what they're fighting for. That's the craziest part to me. I know that it's about the conflict at Guadalcanal in World War II, but that's only because I have the IMDb page open. You could watch this movie and have no idea, and I think that's part of the commentary as well. It's like, this is all pointless. It's just dirt. One of the guys in there who's just lost his mind from war says, "What is this? This is real estate." I think it's Sean Penn.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
And
about
then
property.
it all comes down at the end, and it gets more contemplative again. And yeah, it's just a really interesting arc.
There's
Absolutely.
this movie, I feel like it does a really good job of encapsulating like so many different narratives and characters that all have their own story, and it jumps around between them. But it's really cool, like the way that it's successful in that. But to what you were just saying, Jesse, I feel like there's this big theme of nature in the movie. And soldiers, you know how they have the voiceovers from different soldiers? There's one
Yeah.
specific one that I feel like is addressing nature and the idea of the ferocity of nature, I guess.
What is this war in the heart of nature?
Yeah, and like,
Yeah,
who are
I think
you
it's
to
Jim
live?
Caviezel.
Who are you to live in so many forms? I loved that line.
Yeah, it was great.
Like,
Yeah.
I think that he's talking about nature, but I'm not entirely sure.
Well, I'd love to respond to that. Yeah, it's a really great point because I saw that too. That's kind of why I attributed Keats originally, because he had that very broody aspect of nature where he knew he was going to die but still saw like the majesty in every green leaf and every drop of dew. Like every little thing to him was so majestical. To use a made up word.
Majestic.
I like that word.
Yes.
That's a good one.
But everything to him was so beautiful because he saw the world through such a limited lifespan. And I really think that lens is applied to soldiers in this movie. Like each man is seeing his life come to a close, whether it's going to happen soon or it's happening around him. And it's just extremely beautiful in a sad way, as much like Keats' poetry is, where you're kind of relating to these men. Like, yes, you are all young men watching the end, and that is horrifying.
I mean, if you were going to draw a parallel to any realm of philosophy, it'd definitely be existentialism. It's definitely an existential movie. I mean, it's hard to talk about, right? Because there's so much going on, and it's interesting. This is a movie that if somebody who's used to having like a really solid plot watched it, I could see people hating this movie.
Oh, yeah.
And I really wasn't sure where you guys would fall. And this goes into what people feel about the director, Terrence Malick, who's very divisive. The parts of this movie that like go away from any kind of narrative and are just like nature shots with philosophy on top, some people fucking hate that. And a lot of his movies, especially these days, are like almost nothing but that. They're like completely abstract, basically like visual tone poems. And that can be really frustrating to people, and I totally get it. Because it can feel like if you're not willing to sort of meet him halfway and ask questions, or just if you're not keyed into, I don't know, just something. I'm not gonna put it above or below. I'm just saying it's something.
I think that him being like doing this kind of tone poem effect on a historical battle that is like so well entrenched in history and like was an actual, event. I think that helps a lot ground it in the reality that it needs to be able to be so abstract. I think I haven't seen a lot of his other films. I don't know if I've seen any of them. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but I feel maybe as if that helped this movie be more accessible to audiences, right? My question to you guys is 1998, right? 3 years later, World Trade Center goes down. We go into massive wartime overdrive as a country. Do you
Yeah.
think this movie would have been like? What do you think this movie? First off, do you think it would have been made? And what do you think the reception would have been? Because we were in a period of very stable peace at this point as a country.
Yeah. Well, I think there's two ways to answer that. One is the audience perspective. I think maybe the audience wouldn't have been quite as interested. But your other question, or the other part of that question that you asked, is how would it have gotten made, or would it have gotten made, or how would that change?
Mm-hmm.
And that goes into Malick. See, this is a very interesting point in Terrence Malick's career, because he made 2 movies in the 70s and then didn't make movies for 20 years. And he came back and made this one. And the interest, when people knew that he was making this, was absolutely insane. Let me pull up the Wikipedia page here, and I will tell you not only who's in this movie, but who wanted to be in this movie. People were lining up around the fucking block to be in this movie.
Makes so much sense. This movie was such a this guy's in it type of
Yeah,
movie.
it's
Like,
chock
John
full.
Cusack comes in
constantly
halfway
surprising
through.
you. Yeah, you're like 3/4 of the way. You're like, George Clooney's in
I know.
it.
I know.
Fuck?
I know.
So yeah, this cast. You got Sean Penn, Adrian Brody, Jim Caviezel, Ben Chaplin, George Clooney, John Cusack, Woody Harrelson. You got Jared Leto in there,
Yeah, I
our
saw
favorite
that.
actor. We got to see him get killed. Nick Nolte, John C. Reilly,
Yeah.
John Travolta. There were some people who got cut out of the movie. There's basically an entire base of film that is an entirely different movie starring Adrian Brody.
Oh.
Yeah, Adrian Brody was pissed because he basically shot an entire movie with him as the lead,
Oh.
and it ends up that he has like 2 lines of dialogue.
Yeah, he's tiny little fife.
But the people who wanted to be in it, who were like trying to get Malick to let them be in, this is crazy because Malick had only made 2 movies and none in 20 years. So you had Robert De Niro, Robert Duvall, Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Pacino, Gary Oldman, Bruce Willis wanted to be in there, Kevin Costner.
So everyone.
Everyone wanted to be in this movie. Johnny Depp, Edward Norton. Yeah, I could go on.
Yeah.
The list keeps
so
going.
every famous actor at the current time period and now.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so it makes a lot of sense because this movie has about as many of those type of actors as it can possibly
It's a good
fit.
shove in. Yeah.
You're like, literally when John Cusack comes out, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. And then he just leads the regiment and like destroys a bunker. And it's like, holy fuck. Okay. Badass John Cusack out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's fucking insane.
Yeah. But I don't know. To bring this kind of ground back to something else that is very interesting is the way it kind of flips in the middle. I don't know if that was something you guys noticed, but we see the hardship and the pain and the insanity and the suffering and the emaciation of these American soldiers and the fragmented aspect of their command structure, how everything seems so broken. It's not like what we see in other war movies where it's like, yes, sir, okay, cool, the order's found from the top. All right, we got our orders. We got to do it. It's like everything's broken and shattered. Nothing makes sense. Everyone's confused. People are leading who shouldn't be. It's so fragmented, but then it kind of flips, and all of a sudden now, as they're attacking the Japanese in earnest, you see the exact same conditions in the Japanese soldiers, arguably worse. I mean, these thin, emaciated soldiers, because, at the time the Japanese had this mentality of, no surrender, death before surrender. It was this huge dishonor to surrender. And you see this like pain, dishonor, and emaciation. It was just, that's actually where the movie kind of like triggered that emotional response for me. It was like, wow, like he didn't pull punches at all. He showed both sides in this like pointless engagement. I don't know. It was just really disturbing at that moment.
Yeah, I could not agree more. The moment when they have captured the Japanese soldiers, and one of the Americans is just like beating them when they pull them out of their holes and like shooting them in the head and stuff, and just like he's doing it out of sheer just blind anger and frustration, while another American soldier is weeping. But then when you have the Japanese soldiers back at the camp, the prisoners, and it just lingers on their faces. And that's all it really has to do. And you're like, wow, this is just stunningly, empathetically human. Like, if you have empathy, this movie's going to fuck with you real hard.
It's almost...
And that's one of the big moments.
It's almost shot like a nature documentary. And I don't mean that like as an insult. I mean, some of those nature shows and things like that have some of the best camera work out there, right? Like, it's just extremely pretty but gritty and real at the same time. But I feel like it's very beautiful film, and it opens very beautifully. I mean, it's like you're underneath a canopy, and there's like rays of light shining through. And then throughout the entire film, like even when they're in the grass, the high grass when they're rolling up the ridge, like there's moments where it's just like waving, you know? I mean, but the most horrible shit is going on. Men are crying, like you said, and losing their minds and whatnot. But
I try to say the movie's beautiful. I really wouldn't. I really couldn't agree with you on that point. I would say this movie is horrifyingly ugly with these really amazing shines of light, these beautiful shafts of light that cut through the haze and give you that one moment of respite where you can take a breath. Like, you know, you have this scene where they're advancing at first through the hill, and, you know, the two soldiers, it's like, I think they're actually the first two deaths in the movie. The first two soldiers, he tells them to advance, and they immediately get shot down, and everyone's like, fuck. And then it just sits, and that tension just sits, and the camera cuts to the grass, and you see the sun like taking over. Mm-hmm. Because time is passing. So you see it go from like early morning shaded to like late morning full sun.
Yeah.
And it's like shining off the green grass, and you're like, it almost made you forget about that horrendous like little moment of tension, and then boom, you're right back underneath the dark cloud, and there's artillery and screaming and crying, and it goes back to being just ugly war.
See, I think it's the exact opposite, actually, for me. No. I think it's like the movie is overwhelmingly pretty and beautiful, and it like
it's beautifully shot for sure.
But I wasn't too keyed in or like paid too much attention to the gruesomeness, I guess, of it. Because
interesting,
they did a good job not to make like the goriness the main focus of those scenes, right? It was.
I wish it was.
It wasn't.
Well,
like,
I think it's a difficult balance, right? Because you don't want to tip the scales into exploitation territory.
Exactly.
Like, the movie's already super brutal, and I think it did more than enough in that category to where it didn't need to do more.
For instance, Woody Harrelson's death, perfect. I didn't really know or understand what had happened other than he had blown up a grenade very close to him and he had made a mistake. Now, they didn't show what had happened to the lower half of his body. The shot is all from him from the waist up. But everything he's saying and everything that the men are doing, and that one guy promising to write his wife, like, that stuff I was keyed in on. And that stuff was really strong. But
the power of acting.
Exactly. I didn't need the fake blood or the intestines.
You did not need
anything.
to see his butt literally get blown off when he pulls the pin instead of the grenade.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I didn't need that either. Like, gruesome, I wouldn't say this movie is. It's, if I were to talk like Yoda for a minute, it's more like, I don't know where that came from. It's more keep that in, please. It's more of this. It's the human element that is the most disturbing to me. It's all of that shit you just talked about is what is hurt. It makes me sick and turns my stomach. It's this very real interpretation of what it looks like to watch someone die in front of you, you know, and it's like the confusion, the going from cold, you know, and then feeling cold and then kind of losing your sense and just kind of falling asleep, you know. It ticks all the boxes of like, yep, we wanted to make this look as human as possible. And that real human moment where you're like, that's it, lights out. holy crap, that was so well portrayed over and over and over and over again to where you're just like, you're just battered by it, and the insanity and like how they handle each little, it's not like there's no like, even Band of Brothers, which at the time to me was my quintessential war reference, is now such a hero's tale because it's like, oh, our shell shock, shoot the shell shock. It's like, no, you don't murder your fellow soldier because he's gone insane.
No,
I mean,
the only heroism in this movie is empathy.
You're only a hair away from being him. That's what everyone's realizing. Is like, oh wow, I'm one extra shell blast next to my ear until I'm this guy. And so they like try to take his gun away from really slowly and like, okay, we're going to take you back to camp. Like there's an empathy and a love, and like, I'm not going to send men I've lived with for 2.5 years to their death. Yeah. Like there's just a level there where like logic is trying to prevail the whole movie, and it can't in this military structure. Sorry for the rant.
Yeah, no, that's good. It goes back to what I was saying a little bit earlier in terms of like what you consider a structure, like the fact that we don't know where we are. I want to go back to this.
Yeah.
Because it's so emblematic of just the chaos and the futility of war, where it's like you could literally watch this whole movie and have no idea what the point of any of it is. You know what I mean? And that's totally by design.
So there's one
Absolutely.
conversation only, I think, where they mention Guadalcanal. It's between Nick Nolte and the captain who refused to send his men. He's like, I don't know if you understand the importance of our battle here at Guadalcanal. And then he like goes on to tell him what it's going to do for the war and whatnot, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, you know what? The audio, the dialogue in that was so low in the mix that I think I just didn't hear it.
I had to turn subtitles on for this movie, and I actually am glad that I did. Same. It's very literary, which was, I thought, extremely cool and connects to your, Keats interpretation, Jeff.
Yeah, this movie waxes poetic constantly.
That's Malick. I won't go too deep into Malick because the fact that you guys love this movie means we're going to do more Malick, which I'm excited for. So I'll save like some of the bigger sort of, thought pieces I have about him for that. But it is definitely him finding that poetic style. And I feel like when I watched it this last time, I actually thought that a few of the contemplations that are dropped in were a little bit heavy-handed.
Yeah, me too, actually. I was just about to say that.
Yeah, and so I feel like after having seen what he's done since, I feel like this movie, going back to it, is like a poet finding their voice. And he's not there yet. He's there visually. He's there with the way he works with actors. He's there in the thinking. It's just not quite there in like the translation
in the screenplay
into poetry.
Yeah. I felt the same way.
But he doesn't generally use screenplays now, which is interesting. But you kind of have to do that to some degree when you're shooting a war film.
Yeah.
Because you can't just improvise battle scenes. You have to have this shit planned. But we'll save that for one of his other movies.
But
actually, sorry. I just want to mention, piggybacking off that point, but just the parts of the movie that I thought were the worst choreographed were the actual shooting, because you could see that Terrence Malick had no interest in making it look like the soldiers. I mean, they know how to look like they know how to use their guns to a degree, but there was a lot of like loose-handedness with the weapons and a lot of like that wasn't the focus. Yeah, exactly. Like you could tell that all these like muzzle flashes were edited in post and everything. Like there was a level there of disingenuity to the gunplay, but that was almost like on purpose. Not on purpose, but
I did not get that. I'll say
not
that
intentionally
for the listeners.
I mean, that as someone just like, that's something I pay attention to. I just didn't see that level of choreography in the gunplay, but that's not something that should be there.
Do you think that's because you just know that it's being staged, or like if you watch Saving Private Ryan, do you think it's more realistic? For sure.
The gunplay in Saving Private Ryan is much tighter.
Like I think it's really well made in this movie. I don't want to give anyone the impression that it's like looks like a B movie or anything.
Oh no.
I'm not trying to say that at all. I mean, like, you can be a AAA movie and have like a movie can have downsides, even though it's
for sure.
Great, yeah.
Like the gunplay in certain movies is usually open because there are people how do I say this? There's a good group of an audience that knows how to use guns or has used guns before. And there are some movies that actually take into account, like, they want the gunplay to look extremely realistic, right? John Wick.
John Wick.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. It's like the
And that's
prime
not
example.
Terrence Malick.
Exactly.
That's not what he's doing
Exactly.
here. And so, like, that's the point. Is like it doesn't look fake. It doesn't look like they're using rubber guns and
That's what. That's the point I wanted to
Yeah,
make. It doesn't look
yeah.
fake. It doesn't look
Yeah,
fake. It looks
definitely
good.
doesn't look fake. It just
It's just you might notice it if you're
you could-
keyed into that.
yeah, if you're just looking for things to be like, oh yeah, like they're because but I think that's a testament. I'm not using that as a
Yeah.
complaint. I'm saying like that is actually a perfect thesis to what this movie is like it doesn't focus on those parts of war movies.
It's the reactivity to the violence that grabs you so much that nothing else matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say
Yep.
my criticism with the film is the same as Jesse's. I would go as far to say is there are some moments of dialogue and just writing overall in the film that border on camp, like just basic war dialogue, but it's not a huge or glaring issue.
Are you referring to dialogue spoken by actors to each other or the reverie moments?
Both.
Both. Okay.
That's just like the writing, like even if it's the writing that they pulled from the novel, it's just some of it like borders on just when I say camp too, I don't mean that like so harshly. That's not what this film is at all. I just mean that like there are some lines of dialogue in it that I feel are lines of dialogue that almost are on like a prefabricated, like machine of war movie dialogue. And you just press a button and a random thing will spit out.
I know what you're saying. I know what you're talking about, and I'm not sure if it's intentional or not. I think it might be.
It could be.
Like I said, because the Nick Nolte character is a commentary on that archetype.
Mhm.
And I think maybe some of those lines of dialogue are also commentaries on the war film archetype, It's like, let's throw this in there.
Most of those lines come from Nick Nolte's character, so it kind of makes, not all, but some of them do.
Yeah, can you think of one that wasn't from him?
Well,
Alex,
I mean,
off the top of your head?
Again, another scene that I like, the Woody Harrelson scene. Like when
Yeah.
he says, "Oh, I feel cold." I always think to myself, like, fuck, how many war movies am I going to see where someone says that? Like, I get it,
Yeah.
okay? I get that people feel cold when you die. But
Mm-hmm.
you don't need to say it every single time. But
Mm.
I don't think, like,
Well,
that's like 4 words, right? Like 3 words. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't break the movie or anything. There are just little moments in it where, like you said, you see a growing poet. And every once in a
Yeah.
while, that poet will veer into an avenue of just being like, okay, this is a little bit of cliche or overdone. But for the most part, I mean,
You make it your own.
yeah, I think this is really strong.
Yeah, I think heavy-handed is a better way to put it, as Jesse did. I think it was also really most of that was during the end for me, because it's hard to wrap up a movie. I think poetically this intense and this like mind-shattering, I don't know, demonstration of war. So I think at the end, like, I hope I come back to you the same man as I left. Like those type of lines are like, they're not bad. Like I don't roll my eyes when I hear them, but I go, yeah, okay, that is something that you probably would say in a type of coming back from war, especially when you spoilers for the end, he goes back. I stress to say protagonist, our first
It's the
character
closest that we
see,
have. Yeah.
goes back to this village in which he was gone AWOL in the beginning, and they don't recognize him in the sense of who he has become. But in the same time, it's almost like violence and anger has infected the village that he once considered peace. And
Yeah, there's a beautiful part of that as well, where the beginning is filled with this great music, and that becomes like a theme, a little theme that is called back to a couple times. That's like that village's theme song kind of thing.
Mhm.
And at the end, it's devoid of music when he goes back, and it feels like flat and empty.
They're like,
And so it's like after war, there's just this flat emptiness to things. I don't know.
the music is really good in this movie, I want to say, too. It stayed away from that 1990s, like, orchestral type music that, like, is just basically, like, give this movie
Oscar
an Oscar.
music?
Exactly,
Yes.
right? It's like, please give this movie an Oscar over violins and cellos and whatnot. This had the classic, like, not classic, excuse me, I take that back. This had the Hans Zimmer that we know now. It was very, like, rhythmic and very, like, minimal at some points. And some of the songs lasted an extremely long time. Because I don't know if we've mentioned this yet, folks, but this movie is very long.
Yeah, it's going on 3 hours.
Yeah, it's a heaping helping of violence and.
I was gonna
more
say
intensity.
before we got past Woody Harrelson, I thought his character was really interesting as well because I was really keyed into this aspect of fear in this movie. Like it's about different things each time I watch it. This time it was really about fear, and it was also about the contempt of fear. And I thought that was really well portrayed, not just in Nick Nolte, but in Woody Harrelson. You see the soldier who is acting sick, to get out of duty because he's just like, I mean, scared shitless, basically. And Woody Harrelson just has complete contempt for him.
Yeah. I mean, he could actually be sick, like psychosomatically, right?
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Like-
You're about to go into battle.
Yeah. And Woody Harrelson's having none of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was an interesting scene. I almost saw Woody Harrelson as I always saw each of these soldiers as like a different representation of why or how men enlist and how they interpret war. And you have all these different little tiny windows. It's like looking through a dollhouse. You can look into all these tiny little windows and see these different rooms inside these characters' heads. And Woody Harrelson's like, he's not Nick Nolte, but you can see he wants to be that kind of man. He wants to be, Nick Nolte when he comes on the battlefield after everyone's had their heads down for hours. He's the only one standing, and he's like, "Hey, why are you sitting? How can you see anything?" Like he has that bravado of the fearless soldier, and it's almost like Woody Harrelson wanted to be that soldier, but you could still see he had fear in his own eyes, and he was sweating, and he wanted to be, he was prepping his grenades. And I don't know if you noticed that in the beginning, right before the battle, he prepped his grenades and put them on his side, and then he grabs the pin on accident. So it's almost like in his hasty preparation to be a good soldier led to his downfall, because then he pulls the pin instead of grabbing the grenade. And these are frag grenades, to kind of go back to Alex's point, where they don't stylize much of the type of artillery and ammunition. Like frag grenades, like they can take off body parts, but they mostly just send pieces of hot slag into your body. So if a frag grenade went off on his hip, surely he'd probably have like a pretty fucked up hip and broken leg, but there wouldn't necessarily be anything besides a lot of blood, because all these just pieces of metal lodged into his gut. So it kind of tones down that level of gratuitous violence. It's not the opening scene to Saving Private Ryan. We don't see that this movie. We see a glimpse here or there. And that's mostly what I love, is this contemplative side.
It's more, I mean, there are grander scale action scenes in this. Not grander than Saving Private Ryan.
I'm just talking about gratuity of violence and like gore. I'm not talking about grand.
This movie feels more personal.
Yeah.
It's more of a personal window into all these people, from Woody Harrelson and Nick Nolte's like sort of, just hardline, hard-veined military officer types to people like Jim Caviezel's character, who's our main guy, he was a really great casting choice for that character because his eyes just radiate empathy. He has these like beautiful blue eyes. I could see why Mel Gibson cast him as Jesus.
I really want to ask you both about his character in particular. His character confused me the most. I didn't, he goes AWOL, they find him, they punish him by putting him on a stretcher unit, which I guess was supposed to show him that like, hey, this is what happens when you go AWOL, is that men die because of your actions. But he wants to get back into his company because he still loves his brothers in arms. He was a very complicated but fragmented character, and eventually they abandon that narrative almost, and he becomes this dreamy-eyed just like observer with a half smile on his face the whole time. And I almost had a sense of a man in Nirvana. So my question, long-winded as always Jeff's questions are, is do you think this character is a representation of kind of Nirvana, or a state that a soldier can be in, where he can kind of just observe war and not be affected?
I think it's wonderful that you're asking that, and the reason you're asking that is a testament to Terrence Malick, because I don't think Terrence Malick is a director who is interested in explaining things. He doesn't even give interviews about his movies. He's more like somebody who's asking questions, and maybe this is just sounds like really pretentious. Depends on your subjectivity, I suppose. But to answer your question, I don't know. I think he's a fascinating character. I think there is some level of acceptance within him where he's like, he's questioning it, but at the same time, he's just at peace with it in a way that nobody else in the film seems to be. Whether he's watching the calmness of the village play out in the beginning, or whether he's volunteering to go on, basically a suicide mission because some of the other guys might get hurt. He's just in it for, I don't want to say in it for the ride, because that implies like a lightness of tone that's not correct.
Yeah.
I don't know. Alex, you want to weigh in on this?
I mean, I do think that there was a small bit of lightness of tone at the beginning, the way that Jeff was saying. Like, it would almost seem like we were getting introduced to this, like, maverick type of soldier who was, like, a little bit of a rebel, and who had just gone off and, like, was like, oh, I was, dropping acid with all of the natives for a few months while we were on this detail. And there's something about the Pacific theater of World War II and the way that it's portrayed in film that I think lends to this. Like, you see it a lot in Vietnam War movies too, the jungles of the Pacific. But as far as the Nirvana thing goes, I don't know if he is Nirvana or the state of Nirvana, or even if he is a symbol that represents it, but he might be the character that accesses this idea that you're talking about the most.
Well, he has a line in there that's superimposed over something. I think it's like a sunset or something. I don't know. But he says, every man looking for salvation by himself is like a coal drawn from the fire. So I think he's definitely the most, and I think that's him. It's hard to say sometimes because you're not really given a direct line into who is providing the narration. But that I believe that's him saying that. But in any case, that's one of the meditations here is like, all this chaos is pointless. Like, maybe we're all just part of the same thing.
See, he was more positive about it, or his vibe and his like energy was a lot more positive. Whereas Sean Penn's character, I feel like, was the same way. Was like, this is all for nothing. Fuck this. Like, I'm over all this shit. But he was more of like the everyman type soldier that was kind of just like, nah, I'm over this shit too. It's all pointless, whatever. But he didn't have that same like spirituality to him that Jim Caviezel's character did.
I don't know. It's hard because everyone kind of has this gravelly Southern accent at times.
Yes, exactly.
So it's
exactly.
It's hard to tell who's trying to speak. Like, for a while, you have the character whose wife he's like very much thinking about, and he's a little bit darker skin, slick back black hair, and he's like I think he has some of the best lines as far as like these waxing poetic moments, but of just like contemplative about himself. Like, is he ready? Is he the person ready for this war? I don't know. It's very strange, and there's a lot of Odyssey references I picked up.
Really?
Yeah, which was cool. Like, they, he says, you ever read Homer? Obviously.
Oh, that's right.
One.
Yeah.
And then he says rosy-fingered dawn. Nick Nolte's little overline when the dawn breaks and they're about to, which is a line from the Odyssey, talking about like when the sun rises before a great battle, the rosy-fingered dawn. So it's like there's just a couple little allusions to the Odyssey in this, which I thought was very interesting.
What do you think his like idea with that was?
I don't know. I just it's something that just kind of stuck out to me, and I just wanted to make sure I made a mention of. I really don't know where he was going with
Yeah,
that.
it's really rich. There's a lot going on under the hood to sort of chew on.
Yeah,
It becomes even crazier with his later movies, where it's like it's almost all visual metaphor. That it's like asking questions. It's wild. I don't know. We'll do one of those at some point.
Yeah, these characters just transcend soldiers, and these men are not soldiers. These are humans with thoughts and feelings. These aren't grunts that can just be thrown at a wall over and over and like, much like a wave, and try to erode at the wall eventually until it crumbles, and then they can get in there and win the war. It's just
the humanity is what makes this movie win 100%.
Yeah.
Did you guys have a favorite scene or sequence?
I'm actually trying to find that line about the rosy finger Don, because that was my favorite scene, but I unfortunately
good luck pawing through 3 hours for 2 seconds of dialogue.
I'm not going to paw through it. I tried to type it into Google to see if I could find the moment. But everyone's just like these huge 20-page breakdowns about Terrence Malick as a poet. And I don't know. It's insane.
Yeah,
it's like,
there's a lot of scholarship on him out there, for sure.
I don't really know if I have one particular scene.
Oh, wow. Real quick. So there's a documentary on Terrence Malick, and it's called Rosy Fingered Dawn. So I
nice.
think that there's a little bit of a little illusion
yeah,
there.
boy, got something.
I got something. So there you go. Go ahead, Alex. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was done. I was just saying, I don't know if there's like a scene that I can.
Yeah, it's a weird one because that all kind of blends together, right?
It doesn't follow a very traditional plot structure. Like, like the falling action, rising action, all that bullshit. It's not traditional in a way. There are some points where you feel like the movie is like, oh, wow, like this is a big battle scene, and they did it. They're done. But the movie goes on for a little longer and a little longer and a little longer. And there are some times where I thought it was going to end, but then it didn't end, So I don't know. I think the ending, the very final scenes might be my favorite.
When he goes back to the village?
Just at the very, very end, I believe.
Kind of like when they're all on the boat going home, and they're like, there was that great scene with a young man in the early part of the movie where he's like talking to himself in the mirror, like, the only two constants in this world are death and the Lord. He's like really scared to die and trying to hype himself up. And then you actually see he survives, and he has that little final conversation at the end with famous actor X in the movie. I forget which one. And, it's like almost like, oh, wow, this guy survived. This character we see for 5 minutes in the beginning, and it almost shows just the randomness. So I do agree that those scenes were definitely a little. They held a lot, even though they were very quiet.
Yeah, I liked the scene with Thomas Jane, if that's who you're talking about. That was interesting to see him in the movie.
I was looking for him because I like Thomas Jane a lot. I couldn't find him.
Oh, really? I
was just like, maybe I guess he's just super young, and I was like, I just couldn't pick him out. I don't know. There's too many actors.
I don't know. It's hard to explain because, like, every time I see Thomas Jane in a movie, I always visualize the sideburns and the mustache he had going in Boogie Nights. And I always put it on him mentally in the films that he's in, even when he's clean shaven. But
that's funny.
He's only in it for a few minutes, like George Clooney. I mean,
yeah, George Clooney's there for like one scene.
Yeah, he's just
same
like
with John
talking.
Travolta.
I know.
Same with John Travolta.
And it's the worst scene in the movie, John Travolta's scene.
I thought that scene was actually kind of like
that scene is cool because it has Nick Nolte's. It humanizes Nick Nolte.
Yeah.
So that provides humanity for him for the rest of the movie.
I just wish it wasn't John Travolta he was talking to, because
is that just distracting for you,
dude? He doesn't act. He just talks. They just put him in movie and he talks. The last movie he acted in was Pulp Fiction. He just goes there and he's like, "Yeah, I'm John Travolta. You want a cigarette?" Like, it's just.
Did you see the latest one? He did one lately where he tries to act in a Fred Durst directed film. That's the guy from Limp Bizkit, and it's called like Moose or something. And he plays like a very high on the spectrum, like super fan or something like that.
Yes, I did see that.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't
see the movie, but
we saw the Red Letter Media shit from it. Yeah.
The YouTube channel that shall not be named.
No, everyone knows. Dude, if you're listening to us, you probably like them. They're great.
But no, yeah, like this movie, I don't know. This movie, I don't get this like horrifying vibe from it that you guys are describing. I get it. I get the horrifying nature of war, and I definitely get like this empathetic thing, but I don't know. The beginning of the movie with John Travolta, it's not the worst scene in the movie, but it definitely was a weird way to start off, I guess, because I had no idea where this movie was going for the first 40 minutes. And
No, because you start in the jungle with this guy, and you're like, what is this movie?
Yeah.
If you have no idea, like I showed this to Skylar, and I didn't tell him anything about it. I just wanted to see him like react to it as it happened, and he was very confused for a while. He's like, wait a minute, and now we're on a ship, and like there's soldiers talking about one guy's going to steal a gun, and now we're on another ship. He's like, what's the plot? And I'm like, yeah, exactly. Like,
I thought it was gonna have like a Heart of Darkness type story. Like the way he was in the forest and he was like kind of like with the natives. I was like, oh, okay. Are we going with like a soldier goes native and like rebels against the hierarchy again? No, they just like pick him up and he goes to war. Like it was just like, oh, okay, here we go.
Like, hey, we know you've been missing for the past few months, but we're about to take this ridge and we need you to come back. Yeah, it almost felt like a Vietnam movie at first. Like something
it
about
really did. Seriously.
the Eastern theater of World War II movies. It gets kind of like romanticized, I guess. I don't feel like the same grittiness for some reason when I watch those films. It could be different for other people, obviously. But something about this movie, I was unsure at first. I was like, oh, I always thought this was a World War II movie. I guess it's a Vietnam film. And then, obviously, I was like, oh, wait, this is a World War II movie. So, I don't know.
I don't know if I even thought about that the first couple times I watched it.
Really?
Because I'm somebody who can like, I don't know, I can divorce myself from the sense of place pretty well in movies and like not think about it. I'm like, it's war. You know,
Yeah.
whatever. There are so many wars that we've been a part of that it's like, whatever.
They could
It's
be on
just one of
Jupiter.
them. It could be any of them. Well, it's like, it's just throw a dart, you know? When it comes down to it, they're all the same. And that's kind of like what the movie is saying anyway, you know? It's like, this is all pointless.
Kind of.
It's just throwing it into the meat grinder.
Yeah, in a way. I would also stress to say that there is an element of how war fundamentally evolves humanity and changes us, and change. Then through that we change the nature around us. Because I always think about this epigenetic. I mean, not to get on a little tangent here, but I always think about this kind of epigenetic study that I was reading about people who survive horrible situations like the Holocaust, war, famine, genocide. All of these situations tend to be survived by the people who were either looked inwardly, like, you know, hoarded rations, hoarded things, were able to last. And those type of mentalities, when coupled with stress, create imprints on our genome and change how our offspring react and how their tendencies towards violence and anger and stress and anxiety. And I was almost like, this movie almost kind of was making a point of that, of how the soldiers who tend to survive are the Nick Noltes. Like, and much like great wars like World War I, those soldiers then go home, and that becomes the basis of procreation. And those inborn stress imprinted genetics on them then pass on to our children. So it's almost like the worst of us survive.
Yeah, it's not the Jim Caviezel's, the like nature poets within the war, because he dies. You know,
it's like it's only the people who looked after themselves, and this, I'm making broad generalizations. I'm just kind of loosely talking about an article that I was reading. It creates these imprints in our genome and changes fundamentally how our culture thinks and feels, and whether that's good or bad, I don't know. It's just an element that I feel like Terrence Malick was touching on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
I can't agree more. I was looking through reviews because there was a review that I read that had a really beautiful line about the same kind of thing. I can't really find it right now, but about how like to them the movie was about humanity's distance from nature and like the way that war acts as like the most perverse aspect of nature or like perversion of nature. I don't know, something like that.
Well, yeah, you see, I mean, the shells change shelling has changed the topography of whole areas of the world because of just constant shelling. Places that were once verdant fields of green are marshlands because they were just shelled to oblivion and eventually just started holding water and became a marshland. Like, there's scenes where the soldiers are like shooting up at the trees just out of panic, and the camera
like
makes
a bird
point.
flies. They're like, oh shit.
They're
Fire machine
scared
gun at
of
it.
nature. They're afraid of nature. They're afraid of where the enemy could be hiding. The enemy hides in nature. They hide in foxholes covered with leaves, and they literally, you can't even trust the ground you walk on. And so it's I think that's a great point that you're making, and that Terrence Malick is trying to make here is how men fundamentally react to nature in a sense of war.
I also think too, it's like something about this movie's way that it deals with like the proximity of nature to these men. It's, I don't know, you are surrounded by all of this life and all of this lushness, right? And it's different when you are doing something, your activity is not exploring but killing other men. It's almost like making an argument of the very unnatural in the realm of the natural world, right? And it's like a sin, or it's like just like an abomination for everyone involved.
Absolutely. I mean, these men are immersed in nature. They're like a large part of the movie takes place just like laying in a grass field.
Yeah.
With constant blades of grass surrounding you. I mean, you see that part where that kid is in awe of that plant that closes when you touch it. It's a Japanese fern. And he's almost at odd that the viper, or that I don't know if it's a viper, but the poisonous snake or venomous snake that like starts creeping towards the soldiers. Like, this whole area is foreign to them and deadly. It's like the whole of this island is trying to kill these men.
I also want to point out how beautiful the landscape shots in this movie are. Holy shit!
We have
like when they're on the boat. Driving. I guess, what do you drive a boat? What's the technical term? Pilot a boat?
Sail.
Yeah.
When their boat is being piloted toward the island, you have this nice panoramic shot, the islands and everything. It's just when the movie does linger on nature, it is just ridiculously gorgeous, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a gorgeous place in the world, the South Pacific.
I had no idea either that, like, I knew, I guess, but the portrayal of indigenous peoples in these areas, I like, for some reason in my mind, when I think of the fighting over there during World War II, I just never think of like the toll it must have taken on the people who were already on those islands. And I don't know, just like these two nations show up and they're like, we're going to fight here. And these people are like, okay.
These people are living in huts. They're like, well, I guess we can't do anything about that.
Exactly. Like, good luck. I mean,
but then it affects them anyway.
I think that's probably why the film is bookended the way it is. It's like you're fighting. He's on this island, right? And then he sees the boat, and they're like, "What are our boys doing here?" And then you have this whole war happen, and then he goes back to the village, which I'm just assuming is part of these islands. It makes sense. And then
like
it's all just
place.
Yeah, it's all just fucked. So yeah, then that's probably why it bookended that way. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah,
but I like that. I like that reading. But yeah, man. I mean, I don't know if there's a whole lot more to go into with the Thin Red Line. I think we've pretty well gone through it. Unless you guys have any other big points to make, I think we can wrap it up.
No, I mean, just watch this film. Just watch it. I mean,
yeah.
It just matters.
If you got some stomach, it's definitely worth watching for sure.
Really
is
good.
that me being a fucking a war guy like Nick Nolte?
A boomer.
A boomer. Yeah, kids ain't got the stomach for war these days. Ain't got the stomach to watch the Thin Red Line.
Exactly. I watched Saving Private Ryan when I was 10.
I eat Mel Gibson movies for breakfast.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, I know. Like, people like try to talk about how The Passion is like overtly gruesome, and it's like, it's just annoyingly so.
Well,
It's just so Catholic.
I mean, we don't need to
It's like-
talk about
Yeah,
the passion.
let's not get into the passion at the end
at
of this.
the end of the episode. So yeah, watch The Thin Red Line. It's amazing, beautiful contemplation on the horror of war and humanity and empathy in general. And also watch
I don't know, more of our content.
more of our content. I was gonna loop it back to the beginning, and I couldn't think of the name of
Stargate.
the movie. Stargate. I was gonna say watch Stargate starring Russell Crowe, and have a terrible, terrible joke to end. But now we have a terrible, terrible joke to end. That's like a stumble over itself. So we're on brand, everybody.
Yep, ending it the way we should.
That's right. We'll see y'all next time.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
Chicka chaka chapo. Now our podcast is done, and we have to run. We know it is sad, but we had so much fun. Don't be bereft, Jesse, Alex, and Jeff. We'll be back real soon. The Reel Weirdos. We talk about movies for way too goddamn long. Bo 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 bo.